Hello, everyone. All right. Welcome to week 6 of Reading with Lady T. Hopefully, you all will come on in the room and get comfortable. Welcome, everyone. This is week 6 of our Reading Through Victory and Praise, Reading with Lady T. And we are reading This Present Darkness. Tonight, we'll be reading chapters 21 through 24. And we will get started in just a bit. So glad to have all of you here. Welcome. If you're joining us later on YouTube, I'm Pastor Trina Turner with the Victory and Praise Church. And we are reading for you tonight, This Present Darkness. I hope everyone's day, Monday is always a good day to start reading. Kind of debrief after your busy Monday. 5 o'clock comes up so quick. Hey, Retha. But we're ready, right? Everybody gets settled in. We started out asking you to gather your popcorn or celery sticks or whatever the case may be and get settled in. I just finished me a great sandwich, kind of in a hurried fashion, but we got it done so that I will have all of my energy to put in. Hi, Mother Bird, Dolores Bird, so glad to have you. All right, we're at 5:01. Yes. How was everyone's weekend? Did you have a wonderful weekend? I enjoyed the message this past Sunday. Yeah, you all have to be a part of a small group so you can keep talking about the lesson from Sunday. It was amazing. Good to see you, Aretha. Okay, week 6, you all. I hope you're ready. Chapter 21 through 24 on today. Let's see, we left off. Oh, yeah, they were starting to look into some of the background paperwork. Remember about the college and just determining still other people that's been connected in this whole conspiracy that's going on in Ashton. I think we saw a bunch of people last week trying to destroy evidence. It was good. We saw the maidservant that made a very peculiar trip in the middle of her dinner party. She slipped out, aided by the angels, remember? Yep, spiritual warriors. And now we're going to go into our chapter 21. I think we're going to go ahead and get started because I'm excited and I'm ready. Let me find my glasses. Phone's off on mute. Yes, it is. I'm Pastor Trina Turner reading for you This Present Darkness by Frank E. Peretti. Here we go. Starting chapter 21. Bernice was in a hurry. She was in the back room of the Top of the Town Realty, going through their microfiche files. Carla, the girl out in front, was new enough to the job and the town that she bought Bernice's little talk about being a historian from the college looking for background on Ashton. It didn't take long for Carla to give Bernice a tour of the files and a short course on how to run the viewer. When Carla left her alone, Bernice went straight for the crisscross file. This was certainly a wonderful stroke of luck. The other real estate offices had files that told you what land was owned by whom if you knew where the property was. The crisscross file told you what various people owned if you knew the names of the people. Castle. Bernice flipped through the microfiche holder to the case. She slipped the celluloid into the viewer and began scanning up and down, across and zigzag, the myriads of microscopic letters and figures streaking in a blur across the view screen as she looked for the right column. There, KW, KH, KE, KA. Across to the next column. Hurry it up, Bernice. She found no listing under Castle. How are you doing? Carla asked from up front. Oh, just fine, Bernice answered. I'm not finding much yet, but I know where to look. Well, there was still Joe's Market. She went back to the regular file and pulled out the microfiche for the section, township, and quarter for that address. Into the viewer, the celluloid went. And again, Bernice raced the myriads of listings up and down, looking for the listings there. The legal description of what used to be Joe's Market now Ashton Mercantile. It was tax assessed at $105,900 and owned by Omni Corporation. That was all it said. Bernice went back to the crisscross file. Into the viewer went the, celluloid, up, down, across, Olson, Omer, Omni. The listings under Omni Corporation went down the column, and there could have been over 100. Bernice got her pen and pad and started writing furiously. The many addresses and legal descriptions meant little to her. Many of them weren't even decipherable, but she kept scribbling as fast as she could, hoping she would be able to read her own writing when she looked at it later. She abbreviated, filling page after page in her notepad. Out front, the telephone rang, as it had been doing, but this time Carla's conversation didn't sound too happy. Her voice was hushed and serious, and she kept sounding very apologetic. The jig might be up, kid. Keep writing. In a moment, Carla appeared. Are you Bernice Kruger from the Clarion? She asked directly. Who's asking? Bernice said. That was dumb, but she didn't want to come right out with the truth either. Carla looked very disturbed. Listen, you're going to have to leave right away, she said. That was your boss on the phone, right? Yes, it was, and I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't tell him I let you back here. I don't know what this is all about, and I don't know why you lied to me. But would you please just leave? He's coming over here to lock the place up, and I told him you hadn't come by. You're a doll. Well, I lied for you. Now please lie for me. Bernice scrambled to gather up all her notes and replace the celluloids. I was never here. I appreciate it, said Carla, as Bernice raced out the door. Wow, you just about got me fired. Andy and June Forsythe had a very nice home, a modern log house on the outskirts of town, not far from Forsythe's lumber. Tonight, Hank and Mary had gathered there for a dinner fellowship along with many others of the remnant. As Cryone, Triskel, Seth, Shimon, and Mota sat up in the lofty rafters looking on, the angels could feel the growing power of this little cluster of praying people. The Joneses were there, as were the Colemans, the Coopers, the Harrises, some of the college students. Ron Forsythe was there, along with his girlfriend Cynthia. A few more brand new Christians were with him, just now getting introduced to the rest of the group. Other latecomers were continually trickling in. After dinner, the people gathered and settled around the big stone hearth in the living room while Hank took his place on the hearth with Mary beside him. Each person began to share his background. Bill and Betty Jones had been churchgoers all their lives, but only made a serious commitment to Jesus Christ a year ago. The Lord had spoken to their hearts and searched them out. John and Patty Coleman had been to another church in town, but never knew much about the Bible or about Christ until coming to this church. Yikes. Cecil and Miriam Cooper had always known the Lord, and they were glad to see a new flock gathering to replace the old one. It feels like a lot of replacing a flat tire, Cecil quipped. As others shared, their various backgrounds were brought out. There were different traditions and different doctrinal backgrounds, but any differences were not very important right now. All of them had one main concern, the town of Ashton. Oh, it's a war, all right, said Andy Forsythe. You can't go out on those streets and not feel it. Sometimes I feel like I'm running through a shower of spears, you know? A new couple, friends of the Coopers, Dan and Jean Corsi, spoke up. Jean said, I really think it's Satan out there, just like the Bible says, just like a roaring lion trying to devour everyone. Dan commented, the problem is that we've all just sat to the side and let it happen. It's time we got concerned and scared and on our knees to see the Lord does something about it. Jean added, some of you know our son is having some real problems right now. We really wish you'd pray for him. What's his name? Someone asked. Bobby, Jean answered. She swallowed and went on to say, he enrolled at the college this year, and something's really happened to him. She had to stop, choked with emotion. Dan picked it up. His tone was bitter. Seems like something happens to any kid who goes off to that college. I never knew why or what kind of weird stuff they were really teaching over there. The rest of you should find out about it and make sure you don't let your kids get involved. Ron Forsythe, silent up to this time, piped up. I know what you're talking about, man. It's in the high school, too. The kids are messing around with satanic stuff like you wouldn't believe. We used to trip out on drugs. Now it's demons. Jean ventured through her tears. I know this sounds awful, but I really wonder if Bobby isn't possessed. I was, said Ron. I know I was. Man, I heard voices talking to me, telling me to get some drugs or steal something. All kinds of horrible things. I never let my folks know where I was. I never came home. I'd end up sleeping in the weirdest places and with the weirdest people. Dan muttered, yeah, that's Bobby. We haven't seen him in about a week. Jean wanted to know. But how did you get started in such things? Ron shrugged. Hey, I was already going the wrong way. I'm not sure I'm even all the way straightened out yet. But I'll tell you, when I think I got into the satanic stuff, it's when I had my fortune told. Hey, that's when I caught it. No doubt. Someone asked if the fortune teller was a certain woman. No, it was somebody else. It was at the carnival 3 years ago. Oh, they're all over the place, someone else moaned. Well, that just goes to show how far off base this town has gotten, Cecil Cooper protested. There are more witches and fortune teller around here than Sunday school teachers. Well, we'll just see about what we can do about that, said John Coleman. Ron picked it up again. It's all heavy duty, man. I mean, I saw some pretty weird things when I was into that stuff. I've seen things just float around by themselves. I've read people's minds. I even left my body once and floated around town. You just better all be good and prayed up. Jean Corsi began to cry. Bobby's possessed. I just knew it. Hank could see it was time to take control. Okay, people. Now I have a real burden to pray for this town. And I know you all do too. So I think that's where the answer lies. That's the first thing we need to do. They were all ready. Many felt awkward praying out loud for the first time. Some knew how to pray loudly and confidently. Some prayed in phrases they'd learned from certain liturgies. All meant every word, however they managed to express it. The fervency slowly began to rise. The prayers became more and more earnest. Someone started a simple song of worship, and those who knew it sang, while those who didn't know it learned it. In the rafters, the angels sang along, their voices smooth and flowing like cellos and basses in a symphony. Triskel looked at Cryone and smiled broadly and flexed his arms. Cryone smiled back and flexed. Chimon took his sword and made it dance from the pivot of his wrist, tracing streaks and curls of shimmering light in the air as the blade sang with a beautiful resonance. Malta just looked toward heaven, his silken wings spreading, his arms upraised, caught up in the rapture of the song. Kate quietly set her kitchen table with one plate, one cup, and a saucer. That evening, she ate by herself, hardly able to get anything down because of the emotions tightening in her throat and twisting her stomach. Oh well, it was leftovers anyway. Leftovers from those many other meals Marshall never showed up for. It was happening again. Maybe the place had nothing to do with how busy a newsman could be. Perhaps, even though Marshall had moved to a small, supposedly dull town, he still had that cursed nose for news that led him on his wild hunts into all hours of the night, making a story where one didn't even exist before. Perhaps this was, after all, his first love, more than his wife, more than his daughter. Sandy, where was she tonight? Hadn't they made this move for her sake? Now she was further away from them than ever, even though she still lived in the same house. Sean had grown into her life like a cancer, not a friend. And Caden Marshall never did talk about it like he promised. His mind had been totally preoccupied. He was married to that newspaper, maybe enamored by that young, attractive reporter. Kate shoved her plate away and tried to keep from crying. She couldn't start fussing and shedding tears now, not when she had to think clearly. Undoubtedly, there would be decisions to make, and she would have to make them alone. On the outskirts of Ashton, next to the railroad yard, Tal conferred with his warriors inside an old, unused water tower. Nathan was pacing back and forth, his voice echoing off the walls of the huge tank. I could feel it coming, Captain. The enemy is luring Hogan into a trap. There has been a dangerous shift in affection toward Kruger. His family is in grave danger. Tal nodded his head and remained deep in thought, exactly as one might expect. Rafar knows no frontal attack will work. He's trying his evil hand at subtlety, at moral compromise, and succeeding, I say. Yes, I agree. But what can we do? If Hogan loses his family, he'll be destroyed. No, not destroyed. Knocked down, perhaps. Decimated, perhaps. But it's all because of the dross in his own soul, which the Spirit of God has yet to convict him of. We can do nothing but wait and let all things take their course. Nathan could only shake his head in frustration. Gilio stood nearby, pondering Tal's words. Of course, what Tal said was true. Men will sin if men will. Captain, Gilio said, what if Hogan falls? Tal leaned back against the dank metal wall and said, we can't be concerned with the question of if. The question we must deal with is when. Both Hogan and Bush are now laying the foundation we need for this battle. Once that's done, Hogan as well as Bush must fall. Only their clear defeat will coax the strong man out of hiding. Gilio and Nathan both looked at Tal with consternation. You would sacrifice these men? Nathan asked. Only for a season, Tal answered. Marshall brought out Ernie Johnson's large packet of pirated records from the Whitmore College accounting office and handed them across the Clarion's reception counter to Harvey Cole. Cole was a CPA Marshall knew well enough to trust. I don't know what you'll be able to make of all of this, said Marshall, but see if you can find whatever Johnson found and see if it looks crooked. Wow, said Harvey, this is going to cost you. I'll swap you some free advertising. How about that? Harvey smiled. Sounds fine. Okay, I'll get to it and get back to you. ASAP. Harvey went out the door and Marshall returned to his office, rejoining Bernice in their evening hours project. They were working amid a flurry of notes, papers, phone books, and any other public records they could get their hands on. In the middle of it all, a consolidated list of names, addresses, jobs, and tax records was forming piece by piece. Marshall looked over his notes from his interview with Harmel. Okay, what about that judge? What's his name? Jefferson? Anthony C., Bernice replied, flipping through last year's phone book. Yeah, Anthony C. Jefferson, 221 Alder Street. She immediately went to her scrawled notes from the top of the town realty. 221 Alder. Her eye scanned one sheet in her notebook and then another until finally, bingo. Another one? So check me out on this. Jefferson was bumped by the network and Omni came in and bought his house. Marshall scribbled some reminder notes to himself on a legal yellow pad. I'd like to know why Jefferson moved and how much he sold that house for. I'd also like to know who's living there now. Bernice shrugged. We'll just have to go down the list and check all these network people's addresses. I'll lay you odds it's one of them. What about Baker, the judge who replaced Jefferson? Bernice looked at another list. No, Baker's over in the house that used to belong to the high school principal, George Waller. Oh, yeah. He's the one who lost his house in the sheriff's sale. Oh, there are a lot of those. I'll bet we might find more if we knew where to look. We'll have to snoop around the county's finance office somehow. Some way, those people's property taxes never got where they were supposed to go. I can't believe this many people would be delinquent on their taxes. Someone diverted the money so the taxes were never paid. It's dirty, Hogan, just plain dirty. It wasn't Lou Gregory, the old comptroller. Look at this. He had to resign because of some conflict of interest rap. Now Irving Pierce is in, and He's Omni-owned, right? You got it. And what was that you had on Mayor Steen? Bernice consulted her notes but shook her head. He just recently bought his house. The deal looks legitimate, except for the previous owner being the former police chief who left town for no apparent reason. It might mean something, it might not. It's what happened to all of those people that has me wondering. Yeah, and why none of them ever squawked or made a fuss about it? Hey, I wouldn't let the county just come in and auction off my house right out from under me, not without asking at least a few questions. There's something else about this that we don't know. Well, think about the Carlucci's. Did you know their house sold to Omni for $5,000? That's ridiculous. And the Carlucci's went poof, gone, just like that. So I wonder who's living in their house now? Maybe the new high school principal, or the new fire marshal, or a new city councilman, or a new this, or a new that, or one of the new college regents. Marshall scrambled for some more papers. Boy, what a mess. He finally found the list he was looking for. Let's go through those regents and see what we come up with. Bernice flipped through a few pages in her notebook. I know for sure that Pinkston place is owned by Omni, some kind of trust arrangement. What about Eugene Baylor? Don't you have that somewhere? One of us does, but now I can't remember who. They both fumbled through their notes, paperless. Marshall finally found it among his scattered leaves. Here it is, Eugene Baylor, 1024 Southwest, 147. Oh, wait, I think I saw that here somewhere. Bernice perused her notes. Yeah, Omni owns that too. Sheesh. Deeding everything over to Omni Corporation must be a requirement for membership. Well, that makes Young and Brummel card-carrying members. It makes sense, though. If they all want to meld into one universal mind, they have to do away with individuality, and that means no private ownership. One by one, Marshall read off the names of the college regents, and Bernice researched their addresses. One of the 12 regents, 8 were living in homes. Of the 12 regents, 8 were living in homes owned by Omni Corporation. The others rented apartments. One of the apartment buildings was owned by Omni. Bernice had no information about the other apartment buildings. I think we've ruled out coincidence, said Marshall. And now I can't wait to hear what your friend Limley has to say. Sure, that's Cassup and Omni Corporation are linked. That's what they'll say. That's obvious. Marshall took just a moment to ponder. But do you know what really scares me? So far, everything we see here is legal. I'm sure they've been crooked somewhere to get where they are, but you can see they're working within a system, or at least doing a very good job of looking like it. But come on, Marshall. He's taking over a whole town, for crying out loud. And he's doing it legally. Don't forget that. But he must leave some tracks somewhere. We've been able to sniff him out at least this far. Oh, Marshall took a deep breath and then sighed it out. Well, we can try to track down every person who sold out and left town, try to find out why it happened. We can check into what positions they held before they left and who holds that position now. Whoever holds the position now can be asked what connection he or she has with Omni Corporation or with this universal consciousness mind-tripping group. We can ask each and every one of them what they might know about the elusive Mr. Castle. We can do some more research on the Omni Corporation itself, find out where it's based and what it deals in, what else it owns. We have our work cut out for us. And then I guess it'll be time to go directly to our friends with what we know and get a response from them. Bernice could feel something coming across in Marshall's manner. What's bothering you, Marshall? Marshall tossed his notes on the desk and leaned back into his chair to ponder. Bernie, we'd be fools to think we're immune to any of this. Bernice gave a resigned nod. Yeah, I've been wondering about it, wondering what they might try. I think they already have my daughter. It was a blunt statement. Marshall himself was shocked at the sound of it. You don't know that for sure. If I don't know that, then I don't know anything. But what kind of real power could they wield except economic and political? I don't buy all this cosmic spiritual stuff. It's nothing but a mind trip. That's easy for you to say. You're not religious. You'll find it's a lot easier. So what if we end up like Harmel, no family left, just hiding in the bushes, talking about spooks? I wouldn't mind ending up like Strachan. He seems comfortable enough just being out of this whole thing. Well, Bernie, even so, we better see it coming before it gets here. He grabbed her hand in earnest and said to her, I hope we both know what we're getting ourselves into. We may be in too deeply already. We could quit, I suppose. You know we can't do that. I know I can. I'm not putting any expectations on you. You can get out now. Go somewhere else. Work for some ladies' journal or something. I won't mind. She smiled at him and held his hand tightly. Die all, die merrily. Marshall only shook his head, smiled in return. Woohoo! All right, chapter 22. Chapter 22. In another state, in a low-income section of another town, a little panel truck weaved its way down a kid-cluttered street through a housing project. All the little duplexes, except for different color schemes, came from the same mold. As the truck pulled to a stop at the end of an aging asphalt cul-de-sac, Princess Cleaners could be seen printed on its side. The driver, a young lady in blue overalls, her hair in a red scarf, got out. She opened the side door and pulled out a large laundry bundle and some bag-draped dresses on hangers. Rechecking the address, she made her way up one walk to one particular door and rang the bell. First, the curtain of the front window pulled to the side for a minute, and then there were footsteps toward the door. The door opened. Hi, got some cleaning here, said the young lady. Oh, yes, said the man who answered the door. Rufus. Oh, yes, said the man who answered the door. Just bring it in. He opened the door wider so she could make her way into the house as three children tried to keep out of her path despite their curiosity. The man called to his wife. Honey, the cleaning lady is here. She came in from the small kitchen looking tense and nervous. You children should go outside and play, she ordered. They whined a bit, but she herded them out the door, closed it, and then drew shut the one window that still remained open. Where'd you get all this laundry? The man asked. It was in the truck. I don't know who it belongs to. The man, a heavy-set Italian with graying curly hair, offered his hand. Joe Carlucci. The young lady set down the laundry and shook his hand. Bernice Kruger from the Clarion. He showed her to the chair and then said, They told me I was to never to talk to you or Mr. Hogan. For the sake of our children, they said, Mrs. Carlucci added. This is Angelina. It was for her sake, for the children's sake that we moved away. We left it all. We said nothing. Can you help us? Asked Angelina. Bernice got her pad ready. Okay, just take your time. We'll start at the beginning. At what Al Lindley called the halfway point between Ashton and New York, Marshall pulled the Buick into the parking lot of a little insurance office in Taylor, a small town at the crossing of two major highways with no other real reason for being there. He stepped into the little office and was immediately recognized by the lady at the desk. Mr. Hogan? She asked. Yes, good morning. Mr. Lindley is already here. He's waiting for you. She showed him to another door, which led to a back office that no one was using at the time. Now, there's coffee out here on the counter, and the bathroom is right through this door and to the right. Thank you. You're welcome. Marshall closed the door, and only then did Al Lindley stand up and give him a warm handshake. Marshall, he said, it's great to see you, just great. He was a smaller man, bald with a hooked nose and sharp blue eyes. He had spunk and sparkle, and Marshall had always known him as a priceless associate, a friend who could come through with almost any much-needed favor. Al sat behind the desk, and Marshall pulled a chair up beside him so they could both look over the materials Al had brought. For a little while, they talked old times. Al was pretty much filling the vacancy that Marshall had left in the city room at the Times, and he was beginning to have a real appreciation for Marshall's ability to handle the job. But I don't think I want to trade places with you now, buddy, he said. I thought you moved to Ashton to get away from it all. I guess it followed me there, he said. In a few weeks, New York may be a lot safer. What have you got? Al pulled an 8x10 glossy photo from a file folder and let it slide across the desk under Marshall's nose. Is this your boy? Marshall looked at the picture. He'd never seen Alexander Cassett before, but from all the descriptions he knew, this has to be him. Oh, it's him, all right. He's known and then he's not known, if you catch my drift. The general public never heard of the guy, but start asking investors on Wall Street or government people or foreign diplomats or anyone else in any way connected with international wheeling and dealing in politics, and you'll get a response. He is the president of Omni Corporation. Yes, they are definitely connected. Surprise, surprise. So what do you know about Omni Corporation? Al shoved a stack of materials toward Marshall, a stack several inches thick. Thank goodness for computers. Omni was just a little non-typical in tracking down. They have no central headquarters, no main address. They're scattered into local offices all over the world, and they keep a very low profile. From what I understand, Cassett keeps his own immediate staff with him and likes to be as invisible as possible, running the whole operation from no one knows where. It's weirdly subterranean. They're not on the New York or American stock exchanges, not by their name at least. The stocks are all diversified among maybe 100 different front corporations. Omni is the owner and controller of retail chain stores, banks, mortgage companies, fast food chains, soft drink bottlers, you name it. Al continued talking as he thumbed through the stack of materials. I had some of my staff digging into this stuff. Omni doesn't come right out and print anything about itself. First, you have to find out what the front corporation is. Then you sort of sneak in the back door and find out what interests the big mother company has in it. Take this one here. I'll produce a stockholder's annual report from an Idaho mining company. You don't know what you're really reading about until you get down here to the end. See? A subsidiary of Omni International. International? Very international. You wouldn't believe how influential they are in Arab oil, the common market, the World Bank, international terrorism. What? Don't expect to find any stockholders' reports on the latest car bombing or mass murder. But for every documented above board item here, there are a couple hundred of under the table scuttlebutt that no one can prove, but everyone seems to know. And such is life. And such is your man, Cassett. I want to tell you, Marshall, he knows how to spill blood if he has to, and sometimes when he doesn't have to. I'd say this guy is a perfect cross between the ultimate guru and Adolf Hitler. And he makes Al Capone looks like a Boy Scout. Word has it that even the mafia is afraid of him. Angelina Carlucci tended to spill words more from emotions than from objective recall, which made her story travel in agonizing circles. Bernice had to keep asking questions to get things clear. Getting back to your son, Carl, they broke his hands, she wept. Who broke his hands? Joe intervened to help his wife. It was after we said we would not sell the store. They had asked us, well, they didn't ask us, they told us we better, but they talked to us about it a few times and we wouldn't sell. And that's when they started threatening you? They never threatened, Angelina said angrily. They say they never threatened us. Joe tried to explain. They threaten you without sounding like they are. It's hard to explain, but they talk the deal over with you and they let you know how very wise you will be to go along with the deal. And you just know that you should go along with it if you don't want anything evil to befall you. So just who was it that talked to you? Two gentlemen who were, well, they said they were friends of the new people who owns the store. I just thought at first that they were realtors or something. I had no idea. Bernice looked over her notes again. All right, so it was after you turned them down the third time that Carl had his hands broken? Yes, at school. Well, who did it? Angelina and Joe looked at each other. Angelina answered, no one saw it. It was during recess at school and no one saw it. Carl must have seen it. Joe only shook his head and waved his hand at Bernice to stop short. You cannot ask Carl about it. He is still tormented. He has bad dreams. Angelina leaned forward and whispered, evil spirits, Miss Kruger. Carl thinks it was evil spirits. Bernice kept waiting for these two responsible adults to explain the strange perceptions of their young son. She had trouble phrasing a question. Well, what do you, well, surely you must know what really happened, or at least have some idea. The two of them only stared at each other blankly, at a loss for words. There were no teachers on the ground who assisted him after it happened. Joe tried to explain. He was playing baseball with some of the boys. The ball rolled into the woods and he went after it. And when he came back, he was crazy, screaming. He'd wet himself. His hands were broken. And he never said who did it. Joe Carlucci's eyes glazed with terror. He whispered, big black things. Men? Things, Carl says. They were spirits, monsters. Don't knock it, Bernice told herself. It was clear these poor, deluded people really believed something of this nature was attacking them. They were devout Catholics, but also very superstitious. Perhaps that explained the many crucifixes on every door, the pictures of Jesus and the figurines of the Virgin Mary everywhere, on every table, on every doorway, in every window. Marshall had perused the materials on the Omni Corporation. He still hadn't read about one thing. What about any kind of religious affiliation? Yeah, said Al, reaching for another folder. You were right on that. Omni is just one of several underwriters for the Universal Consciousness Society, and that's a whole other ball of financial and political wax, and perhaps the main motivation behind the company, even more than money. Omni owns or backs, oh brother, there must be 100 of them. Society-owned businesses from cottage-level enterprises clear up to banks, retail stores, schools, and colleges. Colleges? Yeah, and law firms too. According to this news clipping, they have a major lobbying task force in Washington. They've been regularly pushing their own special interest legislation. It's usually anti-Jewish and anti-Christian, if that's of any interest to you. How about towns? Does this society like to buy towns? I know CASIP's done it, or other things similar to that. Listen, I got in touch with Chuck Anderson, one of our foreign correspondents, and he's heard all kinds of interesting things besides seeing a lot of it himself. It seems these universal consciousness people are a worldwide club. We've located society chapters in 93 different countries. They all just seem to pop up everywhere, no matter what part of the world. And yes, they have acquired full control of towns, villages, hospitals, some ships, some corporations. Sometimes they buy their way in. Sometimes they vote their way in. Sometimes they just crowd their way in. Like an invasion without guns. Yes, usually quite legally, but that's probably out of sheer cleverness, not any integrity. And remember, you're also looking at a lot of power and pull here. You're standing right in the path of Big Daddy himself. And from what I gather, he doesn't slow, stop, or even go around. Nuts. I'd cool it, buddy. Call the feds. Let somebody bigger handle it if they want. You still have a job back at the Times if you ever want it. At least cover the story from a distance. You're a Class A reporter, but you're too close. You have too much to lose. All Marshall could think was, why me? Bernice had stumbled too far into a touchy situation. The Carluccis were getting more unsettled and terrified the more she questioned them. Maybe this wasn't a good idea, Joe finally said. If they ever found out we were talking to you. Bernice was about to scream as she heard that word again. Joe, what do you mean by they? You keep saying they and them, but you never say who. I can't tell you, he said with great difficulty. Well, let me at least clear this much up. Are they people? I mean, real people? He and Angelina thought about it for a moment. Then he answered, yeah, they are real people. So they are real flesh and blood people? And maybe spirits too. I'm talking about the real people now, Bernice insisted. Was it real people who audited your taxes? Reluctantly, they nodded. And it was a real flesh and blood man who posted the auction notice on your door? We didn't see him, Angelina said. But it was a real piece of paper, right? But nobody told us it would happen, Joe protested. We always paid our taxes. I have the council checks to prove it. The people at the county office wouldn't listen to us. Angelina was angry now. We had no money to pay the taxes they wanted. We already paid them. We couldn't pay them again. They said they would take our store, take all our inventory, and business was bad, very bad. Half our customers left and wouldn't come in anymore. And I know what kept them away, said Angelina defiantly. We could all feel it. I tell you, windows don't break by themselves and groceries don't fly off the shelves by themselves. It was the devil himself in our store. Bernice had to reassure them. Right, I'm not arguing with that. You saw what you saw. I don't doubt you, but you don't see. Don't you see, Miss Kruger? Joe asked with tears in his eyes. We knew we could not stay. What would they do next? Our store was failing. Our home was sold out from under us. Our children were being tormented by evil spirits, whatever. We knew it would be best not to fight. It was God's will. We sold the store. They gave us a good price. Bernice knew that wasn't so. You didn't get half of what the store was worth. Joe broke down and cried as he said, but we are free. We are free. Bernice had to wonder about that. Then came the Blitz, a die-all-die merrily push for information accompanied by mixed feelings of determination and foreboding, by conflicts between initial impulses and second thoughts. Every Tuesday and Friday for 2 weeks, the Ashton Clarion still appeared on the newsstands and in all the mailboxes of subscribers, but its editor and chief reporter were very hard to contact or even catch a glimpse of. Marshall's phone messages stacked up unreturned. Bernice was simply never home. There were several nights when Marshall never went home at all, but slept here and there, now and then in the office, waiting for special calls, making other calls, working at keeping the paper afloat with one hand while going over lists of contacts, tax records, business reports, interviews, and leads with the other. The people who had left their positions, usually Ashton, and the people who replaced them were definitely two separate groups of widely different persuasions. After a while, Marshall and Bernice could just about predict what their responses were going to be. Bernice called Adam Jarrett, the college regent whose daughter was allegedly molested by Ted Harmon. No, said Jarrett, I really don't know anything about any special, what did you call it? A society, the Universal Consciousness Society. No, afraid not. Marshall spoke with Eugene Baylor. No, Baylor replied somewhat impatiently. I've never even heard the name Kassoff, and I really don't understand what you're driving at. I'm trying to chase down some claims that the college might be negotiating a sale of its property with Alexander Kassoff of the Omni Corporation. Baylor laughed and said, you must have heard about another college. There's nothing like that happening here. And what about the information we've received that the college is in heavy financial trouble? Baylor didn't like that question. Listen, the last editor of the Clarion tried that one too, and it was the dumbest move he ever made. Why don't you just run your paper and leave the running of the college to us? The former regents had a different tune. Morris James, now a business consultant in Chicago, had nothing but bad memories of his last year with the college. They really taught me what it must be like to be a leper, he told Bernice. I felt I could be a good voice on the board, a stabilizing factor, but they simply wouldn't tolerate no dissent. I thought it was highly unprofessional. Bernice asked him, and what about Eugene Baylor's handling of the college finances? Well, I left before any of this really serious trouble arose. This trouble you've described to me, but I could foresee it. I did try to block some decisions the board made regarding the granting of special powers and privilege to Baylor. Thought it was giving too much unauthorized control to one man without the oversight of the other regions. Needless to say, my opinion was very unpopular. Bernice asked a very pointed question. Mr. James, what finally precipitated your resigning from the board and leaving Ashton? Well, that's a tough one to answer, he began reluctantly. His answer took about 15 minutes, but the bottom line came down to my whole business was so harassed and so sabotaged by unseen mobsters, I guess I would call it, that I became too great an insurance risk. I couldn't fill my orders. Clientele dropped way off, and I just couldn't stay above water anymore. The business folded, and I took the hint. I got out of there. I've been doing fine ever since. You can't keep a good man down, you know. Marshall managed to track down Rita Jacobson, now living in New Orleans. She was not happy to hear from someone in Ashton. Let the devil have that town, she said bitterly. If he wants it so bad, let him have it. Marshall asked her about Julie Langstrot. She's a witch. I mean, a real live witch. He asked her about Alexander Campbell, a warlock and a gangster rolled into one. Stay out of his way. He'll bury you before you even feel it. He tried to ask her some other questions, but she finally said, please don't ever call this number again, and hung up. Marshall tracked down as many former members of the city council as he could by telephone and found out that one had simply retired, but all the others stepped down because of some form of hardship. Alan Bates fell ill of cancer. Shirley Davidson went through a divorce and ran off with a new lover. Carl Fromm was set up, as he called it. Carl Fromm was set up, as he called it, with a phony tax scam. Jules Bennington's business was strong-armed out of town by a bunch of mobsters whom he knew better than to identify. By cross-checking, Marshall found that in every case, the deposed city councilman or councilwoman was replaced by a new person connected in some way with either the Universal Consciousness Society or Omni Corporation or both. And in every case, the deposed person thought that he or she was the only one who had left. Now, out of fear, out of self-interest, out of that typical reluctance to get involved, all of them remained far away, out of touch, out of the picture, saying nothing. Some were cooperative in answering Marshall's questions, and some felt very threatened. All in all, though, Marshall got what he was after. As for those who used to own businesses, now run by this mysterious incognito corporation, very few of them had planned on selling out, moving out, or giving up their peaceful lives in Ashton or their successful businesses. But the reasons for leaving was consistently along the same lines: tax bunglings, harassments, boycotts, personal problems, marriage dissolutions, perhaps a disease or a nervous breakdown here and there, with an occasional macabre tale of strange, maybe supernatural occurrences. Former Ashton District Judge Anthony C. Jefferson's story was ominously typical. Word started circulating around the courthouse and the legal community that I was on the tape, receiving bribes for fixing sentences and letting people off. Some false witnesses even confronted me and made accusations, but it never happened. I swear it with all that I had within me. And you can tell me the truth about why you left Ashton? Marshall asked, almost knowing what kind of answer to expect. Personal reasons, as well as professional. Some of these reasons remain with me even now and are still viable enough to restrict what I can share with you. I can say, however, that my wife and I were needing a change. We were both feeling the pressure, she more than I. My health was failing. We at length thought about it. We thought it best to get out of Ashton altogether. May I ask, sir, if there were any unfavorable outside influences that brought about your decision to step down from the bench? Thought about it for a moment, and then with some bitterness in his voice, he said, I cannot tell you who they were. I have my reasons, but I can say yes, some very highly unfavorable influences. Marshall's last question was, and you really can't tell me anything about who they might be? Jefferson gave a sardonic chuckle and said, just keep going the way you are. You'll find out soon enough yourself. Jefferson's words were beginning to haunt both Marshall and Bernice. They had heard many similar warnings as they went along, and both of them were growing more aware of something out there around them, building, coming closer, growing more and more malevolent. Bernice tried to shrug it off. Marshall found himself resorting more and more to quickly blurted prayers, but the feeling was still there. That disturbing sense that you are nothing but a sandcastle on the beach and a 20-foot wave is about to crash down on you. On top of all of this, Marshall had to wonder how Kate was holding up through all of it and how he would ever patch things up between them when this was finally over. She was talking about being a widow again, a newspaper widow, and had even made some very embarrassing suggestions about Bernice. And this thing just had to get over with, much more of it, and he wouldn't have much of a marriage to come home to. Then, of course, there was Sandy, whom Marshall hadn't seen in weeks. But when this was all over, when it was really finally over, things would be different. For now, the investigation he and Bernice were doing was incredibly urgent, a top priority, something that grew more ominous with every new stone they turned. All right, y'all. Chapter 23. Here we go. When things around the office were in their usual quiet post-Tuesday state, Marshall had Carmen search out a good-sized cardboard box and some file folders, and he began to organize the piles of paper, records, documents, scattered notes, and other information he and Bernice had compiled in their investigation into an orderly file. As he went through it all, he also compiled a list of questions on a legal pad on his desk, questions he intended to use in his interview with the first of the real principals in this plot, Alf Brummel. That afternoon, after Carmen had left for a dentist appointment, Marshall made a call to Alf Brummel's office. "Police department," said Sarah's voice. "Hi, Sarah, this is Marshall Hogan. Can I have a word with Alf?" "He's out of the office right now." Sarah let out a long sigh and then added in a very strange, very quiet tone of voice, "Marshall, Alf Brummel doesn't want to talk to you." Marshall had to think for a moment before he said, "Sarah, are you caught in the middle?" Sarah sounded miffed. "Maybe I am. I don't know. But Alf told me in no uncertain terms that I was not to put through any calls from you and that I was to let him know whatever your intentions were." "Huh? Look, I don't know where friendship ends and professional ethics begin, but I sure wish I knew what was going on around here." "What is going on around there?" "What'll you trade me for it?" Marshall knew he was taking a chance. "I think I can find something of equal value if I look hard enough." Sarah hesitated for a moment. "From all appearances, you've become his worst enemy. Once in a while I hear your name coming through that office door of his, he never says it nicely." "Who's he talking to when he says it?" It's your turn." "All right. Well, we talk about him too. We talk about him a lot. And if everything we've uncovered checks out, yeah, I just might be his worst enemy. Now who's he talking to?" "Some of them I've never seen before. Some of them I've seen before, some of them I haven't. He's put several calls through to Julian Langstrad, his whatever she is." "Anyone else?" "Judge Baker was one, and several members of the city council." "Malone?" "Yes." "Everett?" "Yes." "Preston?" "No." "Goldtree?" "Yes." Plus some other VIPs from out of town, and then Spence Nelson from the Windsor Police Department, the same department that supplied our extra manpower for the festival. I mean, he's been talking to a lot of people, far more than usual. Something's up. What is it?" Marshall had to be careful. "It might involve me and the Clarion. It might not. I don't know if I'll accept that or not. I don't know if I can trust you or not. Whose side are you on?" "That depends on who the bad guy is. I know Alf is shady. Are you?" Marshall had to smile at her spunk. "I'll have to let you be the judge of that. I do try to run an honest paper, and we have been carrying on a very intensive investigation of not only your boss, but just about every other bigwig in this town." "He knows it. They all do." "Well, I've talked to just about all of them. Alf was next on my list." "I think he knew that too. He told me just this morning that he did not want to talk to you, but he's sure talking up a storm with everybody else, and he just left here with a pile of papers under his arms, heading for another hush-hush meeting with someone." "Any idea of what they're going to do about me?" "Oh, you can be sure they will do something. I get the feeling they're loading for bear. Consider yourself warned. And I'd advise you to be the sweet, ignorant angel who knows nothing and says nothing. Things could get messy." "If they do, Marshall, can I come to you for answers or at least a ticket out of town?" "We'll be able to deal. Give you anything I can find if you'll keep me safe." Marshall caught it in her voice. This gal was scared. "Hey, now, remember, I didn't ask you to get involved. I didn't ask to be involved. I just am. I know Alf Brummel. I'd better pick you for my friend. I'll keep you posted. Now hang up and act normal." She did. Alf Brummel was in Julian Langstrad's office, and the two of them were looking over a very thick portfolio of information Brummel had brought. Hogan now has enough to fill a front page, Brummel said quite unhappily. You've berated me for being slow in taking care of Bush, but as far as I can see, you've given Hogan nothing but clear freeway since the beginning. Calm down, Alf, Langstrot said soothingly. Just calm down. He's going to be coming after me for an interview any day now, just like he's gone after all the others. What do you suggest I say to him? Langstrot was a little shocked at his stupidity. Don't say anything, of course. Brummel paced the room, exasperated. I don't have to, Jolene. By this point, nothing I say or don't say will make any difference anyway. He already has everything he knows. He knows about the property sales. He has very good leads on all the sheriff sales of the tax delinquent homes. He knows all about the corporation and the society. He has good information on the college embezzlements. He even has more than enough evidence to accuse me of false arrest. Langstrot smiled with pleasure. Your spy has done very well. She brought me a lot of this material today. He's getting it all organized in a file now. He's about to make his move, I'd say. Langstrot gathered all the material neatly, placed it back in its portfolio, and leaned back in her chair. I love it. Brummel only looked at her in amazement and shook his head. You could lose at this game someday, you know. We could all lose. I love a challenge, she exulted. I love taking on a strong opponent. The stronger the opponent, the more exhilarating the victory. Most of all, I love winning. She smiled at him, truly pleased. Alf, I've had my doubts about you, but I think you've come through bountifully. I think you should be there to see Mr. Hogan step into the snare. I'll believe it when I see it. Oh, you will. You will. There was a short lull, and it got strangely quiet around the town of Ashton. People were in touch. Nothing much was said. During the day, Marshall and Bernice organized their materials and stuck close to the office. Marshall took Kate out to dinner one night. Bernice sat at home and tried to read a novel. Alf Brummel kept regular hours, but he didn't have much to say to Sarah or anyone else about anything. Langstrot fell ill, or so the word was from her office, and her classes were canceled for a few days. Hank and Mary thought that maybe their phone was out of order. The thing had been so silent. The Colemans visited relatives out of town. The Forsyths took the chance to do some inventory at the lumber yard, and the rest of the remnant all went about their normal business. There was an odd stillness everywhere. The skies were hazy, the sun blurred, a ball of light. The air warm and sticky. It was quiet, but no one could relax. High on a hill above the town, in the top of a graying, long-dead snag of an old tree, like an enormous black vulture, Rafar, the Prince of Babylon, sat. Other demons attended him, waiting to hear his next command, but Rafar was silent. Hour upon hour, a tense scowl on his face. He sat and gazed down at the town with his slowly shifting yellow eyes. On another hill, directly across the town from Rafar's big dead tree, Tal and his warriors concealed themselves in the woods. They also were looking out over the town, and they could feel the lull, the silence, the ominous deadness of the air. Gilio stood at his captain's side, and he knew this feeling. It had always been the same throughout the centuries. It could be any time now. Are we ready? He asked Tal. No, Tal said flatly, looking intensely over the town. Not all the remnant are gathered. Those who have gathered are not praying enough. Not enough. We haven't the numbers or the strength. And the black cloud of spirits over the strongmen grows 100-fold each day. Tal looked up over the sky of Ashton. They will fill the sky from horizon to horizon. From their hiding place, they could look across the valley over several miles and see their hideous opponent sitting in the big dead tree. His strength has not waned, said Gilio. He's more than ready to do battle, said Tal, and he can pick his own time, his own place, and the best of his warriors. He could attack on 100 different fronts at once. Gilio only shook his head. You know we can't defend that many. Just then a messenger rushed toward them on the wing. Captain, he said, alighting next to Tal, I've brought word from the strongman's lair. There is a stirring there. The demons are growing restless. It's beginning, said Tal, and this word was passed back through the ranks. Gilio stepped up. Captain, Tal took Gilio aside. I have a plan. I want you to take a very small contingent with you and set up watch over that valley. Giulio was not one to argue with the captain, but a small contingent to watch the strong man? The two of them continued in conference, Tal mapping out his instructions, Giulio shaking his head dubiously. At length, Giulio came back to the group, picked out his warriors, and said, "Let's be off." With a rush of wings and the 24, they weaved and zigzagged through the forest until they were far enough away to take to the open sky. Tal summoned a strong warrior. "Replace Signa in guarding the church and tell him to come to me." Then he summoned another messenger. "Tell Cryone and Triskel to rouse Hank and get him praying and all the remnant." In a short moment, Signa arrived. "Come with me," said Tal. "Let's talk." It had been a quiet afternoon for Hank and Mary. Mary spent most of it in the little garden behind the house, while Hank worked to repair a corner of the backyard fence that the kids had broken a hole through. As Mary hunted for weeds among her vegetables, she noticed Hank's hammering getting more and more sporadic until finally it stopped altogether. She looked his way and saw him sitting there, hammer still in his hands, praying. He seemed very disturbed, so she asked, "Are you all right?" Hank opened his eyes without looking up. He shook his head. "I don't feel good at all." She went over to him. "What is it?" Hank knew where the feeling was coming from. "The Lord, I guess. I just feel something's really wrong. Something terrible is about to happen. I'm going to call the Forsythes." Just then the phone rang in the house. Hank went in and answered it. It was Andy Forsythe. "Sorry to bother you, Pastor, but I was just wondering if you feel a real burden of prayer right now. I know I sure do." "Come on over," said Hank. The fence would have to wait. On into the evening, the angelic host waited while Hank, the Forsythes, and several others prayed. Rafar continued to sit up in the dead tree, his eyes beginning to glow in the steadily thickening darkness. His taloned fingers continued to drum on his knee. His brow stayed crinkled with his intense scowl. Behind him, a host of demons began to gather, primed with anticipation and rapt with attention, waiting to hear Rafar's order. The sun dipped behind the hills on the west side, and the sky was washed with red fire. Rafar sat and waited. The demonic host waited. In her bedroom, Julene Langstrot sat on her bed, her legs crossed in the lotus position of Eastern meditation, her eyes closed, her head erect, her body perfectly still. Except for one single candle, the room was dark. There, under the shroud of darkness, she convened her meeting with the ascended masters, the spirit guides from higher planes. Deep within her consciousness, far within the depths of her inner being, she spoke with the messenger. To the eyes of Langstrot's entranced mind, the messenger appeared as a young lady, all dressed in white, with flowing blonde hair that reached nearly to the ground and was constantly in motion, wafted by the breeze. "Where's my master?" Langstrot asked the messenger. "He waits above the town, watching over it," came the girl's answers. "His armies are ready for your word." "All is ready. He may await my signal." "Yes, my lady." The messenger departed like a beautiful gazelle, leaping gracefully away. The messenger departed a filthy black nightmare of a creature born on membranous wings. He departed to take word to Rafar, who still waited. Darkness deepened over Ashton. The candle in Langstrot's room dwindled to one round ebbing flame in a pool of wax, the inky blackness overtaking its weak orange light. Langstrot stirred, opened her glazed eyes, and arose from the bed. With a very small puff of breath, she extinguished the candle and moved in a half daze into the living room where another candle was burning on the coffee table, the wax flowing and hardening onto the macrobid fingers across the photograph of Ted Harmel on which the candle sat. Langstrot sank to her knees beside the coffee table, her head held high, her eyes half shut, her movements slow and liquid. As if floating in space, her arms rose upward over the candle, stretching out an invisible canopy over the flame. And then, so very quietly, the name of an ancient god began to form itself on her lips again and again. The name, a guttural, harsh sound, spilled forth from her like the splitting of hundreds of invisible pebbles. And with each mention of the name, her trance deepened. Steadily, steadily, the name tumbled forth louder and faster, and Langstrath's eyes widened and remained unblinking and glaring. Her body began to quiver and tremble. Her voice became an eerie, wailing sound. Rafar could hear it all from where he sat and waited. His own breathing began to deepen and chug out of his nostrils like putrid yellow steam. His eyes narrowed, his talons flexed. Langstrath swayed and quivered, calling out the name, her eyes fixed on the candle's flame, calling out the name, and then she froze. Rafar looked up, very still, very attentive, listening. Time stood still. Langstrath remained motionless, her arms extended over the candle. Rafar listened. Air began to slowly flow into Langstrath's mouth and nostrils. Her lungs began to fill, and then with one sudden cry from deep within, she brought her hands down like a trap, clapping them on the candle's wick, snuffing out the flame. "Go!" shouted Rafar, and hundreds of demons shot into the sky like a thunderous flock of bats, rushing along a straight and level trajectory northward. "Look," said an angelic warrior, and Tal and his host all saw what looked like a black swarm silhouetted against the night sky, an elongated puff of smoke. "Going north," observed Tal, "away from Ashton." Rafar watched the squadron disappear at great speed and let a mocking grin bare his fangs. "I'll keep you guessing, captain of the host." Tal shouted out his orders. "Cover Hogan and Bush. Awaken the remnant." 100 angels soared downward into the town. Tal could see Rafar sitting in the big dead tree. "Just what are your plans, Prince of Babylon?" he murmured. The phone startled Marshall out of a restless sleep. The clock said 3:48 a.m. Kate moaned at being awakened, and he grabbed up the receiver and mumbled, "Hello?" For a moment, he didn't have the slightest idea who was on the other end or what they were saying. The voice was wild, hysterical, high-pitched. "Hey, simmer down and slow down or I'll hang up," Marshall snapped hoarsely. Suddenly, he recognized the voice. "Ted? Is this Ted?" "Hogan," came Ted Harmel's voice. "They're coming for me. They're all over the place." Marshall was awake now. He pressed the receiver to his ear, trying to understand what Ted was blubbering about. "I can't hear you. What did you say?" "They found out I talked. They're all over the place." "Who is?" Ted started screaming and crying unintelligibly. The sound of it was enough to make Marshall's insides curl up. He groped around the bedside stand for his pen and pad. "Ted," he shouted into the phone, and Kate jerked with a start and turned over to look at him. "Where are you? Are you home?" Kate could hear the cries and wailing, squawkings out of the receiver, and it unnerved her. "Marshall, who is it?" Marshall couldn't answer. He was too occupied trying to get a clear answer from Ted Harmel. "Ted, listen, tell me, where are you?" Pause, some more cries. "How do I get there?" I said. "How do I get there?" I said. Marshall began scribbling hurriedly. Try getting out of there if you can." Kate listened but couldn't make out what the party on the other end was saying. Marshall told whoever it was, "Listen, it's going to take me at least in half an hour to get there. And that's if I can find a station open to get some gas. No, I'll get over there. Just hang tight, all right? Ted, all right?" "Who's Ted?" "All right," Marshall said into the phone. "Give me time. I'll get out there. Just take it easy. Goodbye." He hung up the phone and bolted out of bed. Who in the world was that? Kate needed to know. Marshall grabbed his clothes and began to dress hurriedly. "Ted Harmel, remember I told you about him? You're not going over there tonight, are you? The guy's going crazy or something. I don't know. You get back in bed." "Kate, I have to go. I can't afford to lose this contact." "No, I don't believe this. You can't be serious." Marshall was serious. He kissed Kate goodbye before she could even bring herself to believe he was really going, and then he was gone. She sat there in the bed for a few moments, stunned, and then flopped down angrily on her back, staring at the ceiling as she heard the car back down the driveway and speed off into the night. Ooh-wee. Good to see Elena and Pam and Denise and other than Denise, two Denises. We're in our last chapter, chapter 24, This Present Darkness. Let's do it. Marshall drove about 30 miles north through the town of Windsor and a little beyond. He was surprised to find out how close to Ashton Ted Harmel still lived, especially after they both met in the mountains over 100 miles further up Highway 27. This guy has to be crazy, Marshall thought. And maybe I'm just as crazy to be going along with this whole routine. The guy's paranoid, a real space case. But he sure sounded convincing over the phone. Besides, it was a chance to reopen communications with him after that one-time only interview. Marshall had to do some backtracking, groping around the maze of winding, unmarked back roads in his efforts to make sense of Harmel's directions. When he finally located the little shake-sided house at the end of a long gravel road, a ribbon of pink light was growing on the horizon. He'd taken an hour and a half to get there. Yes, there was the old Valiant parked in the driveway. Marshall pulled in behind it and got out of the car. The front door of the house was open. The front window was broken. Marshall crouched just a little behind his car, taking a moment to check out the situation. He didn't like the feelings he was getting at all. His insides had gone through this kind of dance before, that night when Sandy had run off. And again, there seemed no obvious upfront reason for it. He hated to admit it, but he was afraid to take another step. "Ted!" he called, not too loudly. There was no answer. It didn't look good at all. Marshall forced himself to make his way around his car, up the walk, and onto the front porch very slowly, very carefully. He kept listening, looking, feeling. There was no sound except his own pounding heart. His shoes crunched just a little on the shards of broken glass from the window. Sound seemed deafening. "Come on, Hogan, get with it." "Ted," he called through the open door. "Ted Harmel, it's Marshall Hogan." No answer, but this had to be Ted's place. There was his coat hanging on the rack. On the wall above the dining room table was a framed front page from the Clarion. He ventured inside. The place was a mess. The dishes that had been in the corner hutch were now shattered all over the floor. In the living room, a chair lay broken on the floor just below a large hole in the plaster wall. The bulbs were shattered out of the ceiling light fixture. Books from the shelves were thrown everywhere. The side window was also broken out, and Marshall could feel it just as strongly as before. That fierce, gut-wrenching terror he had felt that other night. He had tried to shake it off, tried to ignore it, but it was there. His palms were slick with sweat, and he felt weak. He looked around for a weapon and grabbed a fireplace poker. "Keep your back to the wall, Hogan. Keep quiet. Look out for blind corners." It was dark in here. The shadows were very black. He tried to take his time, tried to let his eyes get used to the dark. He felt for a light switch somewhere, anywhere. Behind and above him, a black leathery wing quietly repositioned. Leering yellow eyes watched his every move. Here, there, over there, all over the room, in the corners of the ceiling, upon the furniture, clinging like insects to the walls were the demons, some of them letting out little snickers, some of them drooling blood. Marshall made his way stealthily to the desk in the corner and, using a handkerchief to prevent fingerprints, slid the drawers open. They had not been disturbed. Keeping the poker at the ready, he continued to move through the house. The bathroom was a mess. The mirror was shattered. The shards were in the sink and all over the floor. He moved down the hall, staying close to the wall. Hundreds of pairs of yellow eyes watched his every move. There was an occasional hacking from the throat of a demon, a short burst of vapor from its dripping mouth. In the bedroom, the most loathsome spirit of all awaited him. They watched the bedroom doorway from their positions on the ceiling and on the walls in every corner, and their breathing sounded like the dragging of chains through the gravel-filled mud. From where he stood, Marshall could just see the corner of the bed through the bedroom door. He approached cautiously, making frequent checks behind him and even above him. When he reached the bedroom door, a single image, like a photograph, was instantly engraved on his mind. 1 second seemed like an eternity as his eyes darted from the blood-splattered bedspread to the bullet-blasted skull of Ted Harmel to the large revolver still dangling from Harmel's limp hand. Shrieks, thunder, fangs bared to bite. The demons exploded from the walls, corners, and every nook of the room like arrows and went for Marshall's heart. A blinding flash, then another, then another. The whitest hot light traced brilliant fiery arcs, a searing edge that cut through the flock of evil spirits like a scythe. Parts of demons tumbled into nothingness. Other demons imploded and vanished in an instantaneous billows of red smoke. Waves of spirits still poured down upon the one lone man who stood there in reasonless terror. But suddenly this man was surrounded by four heavenly warriors robed in glorious light, their crystalline wings unfurled like a canopy over their charge, their swords blurring into waving, swirling sheets of brilliance. The air was filled with the deafening cries of hideous spirits as blades met flanks, necks, torsos, and demon after demon was flung aside in pieces that instantly disintegrated and vanished like a vapor. Nathan, Armith, and two other angels, Center and Creed, darted, fainted, spun, batted away one spirit and sliced another, thrusting their blades in myriad of directions. The lightning from their swords flashed against the walls, bright enough to bleach out all colors. Nathan gutted one demon and sent it spiraling through the roof, leaving a red trail of vapor until it vanished. With his sword, he slashed. His free hand, he collected demons by their heels. Armith and Center whirled in a high-powered blur, mowing through demons as through cut grass. Cree threw himself against Marshall and kept his wings spread to protect the stunned man. "Push them back," shouted Nathan, and he began to spin his fistful of demons about his head, feeling the shock of their bodies striking other demons with the rhythm of a stick of a picket fence. The demons began to shy back. Half their numbers were now gone, as was half their zeal. Nathan, Armith, and Center started flying a tight spiral around Marshall, their swords knifing through the fading demonic ranks. One demon shot straight into the sky with a wail of terror. Center got right after it and quickly dispatched it like a slaughtered game bird. He remained above the house for a time, containing any fleeing spirits very neatly and abruptly, swatting them out of existence as if they were fast-served tennis balls. And then almost as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. No demon remained. None had escaped. Nathan alighted back in the hallway as his wings folded and the light around him faded. "How's our man?" Cree was relieved to say, "He's still very shaken, but he's all right. He still has the will to fight." Armith came in for a landing and immediately checked Ted Harmel's pitiful frame. Center dropped through the ceiling and joined him. Armith shook his head and sighed. As Captain Towle said, Rafar can choose any fronts he wants at any time. They have owned and tormented Ted Harmel for a long time, Center conceded. "Is Kevin Weed covered?" Nathan asked. Armith answered with a little curiosity. Towle said Cigna to watch care Weed. Cigna? Was he not assigned to guard the church? Towle must have had a change of plans. Nathan got back to the immediate business. We'd best see to Marshall Hogan. Marshall got a grip on himself. For a moment, he thought he would really panic, and that would have been the first time in his life. Nuts. I don't need to get involved in this stuff. Not now, he thought. He took a few more moments to ease up and think the thing through. Harmel was history. But what about the others? He went into the dining room and found the phone, using his handkerchief again and pen to dial. He called the operator, who put him through to the police department in Windsor, a town closer than Ashton, fortunately. Something told Marshall that Brummel and his cops were definitely not the ones to call in on this. "This is an anonymous call," he said. "There's been a fatal shooting, a suicide." He told the sergeant who answered how to get there and hung up. Then he got out of there. Several miles further north, he pulled the Buick into a filling station and went into a phone booth. He first called Eldon Strachan's number. There was no answer. He had the operator ring the Clarion. Bernice should be there by now. Come on, girl, answer the phone. Ashton Clarion. It was Carmen. Carmen, this is Marshall. Put Bernice on, will you? Sure thing. Bernice picked up her extension immediately. Hogan, are you calling in sick? Act normal, Bernie, Marshall said. I've got some heavy developments. Well, take an aspirin or something. Good girl. Brace yourself for this one. I just came from Ted Harmel's place. He just blew his brains out. I got a call from him early this morning, and he was talking crazy, talking about somebody coming after him. So I drove to his place and just now found him. It looked like he'd had an all-out fight with something. The place was a mess. So how are you feeling, really? Bernice said, and Marshall could tell this was the acting job of her career. I'm shook up, but all right. I called the Windsor police, but chose to get out of there. Right now, I'm up near Windsor on Highway 38. I'm going to head north and drop by Strachan's place to check on him. I want you to check on Weed right away. I don't want any more sources dying on me. Do you think it's catching? I don't know yet. Harmel was a little crazy. It may be an isolated incident. I do know I've got to talk to Strachan about it, and I don't want you to wait to check on Wheat. Okay, I'll do that today. I should be back this afternoon. Be careful. You take care of yourself. Marshall got back in his car and checked his map for the best way to get to Eldon Strachan's place. It took him another hour to make the drive, but soon he was pulling up the same old driveway to the quaint little farmhouse. He slammed on the brakes and the Buick lurched to a halt, skidding on the gravel. He opened the car door and had another look from outside his car windows. There was no mistake. The windows were broken in this house, too. Come to think of it, by now, that collie would be barking, but the place was dead silent. Marshall left the car where it was and quietly made his way toward the house. No sounds. The windows on the side of the house were also broken. He noted that the glass was broken inward this time, unlike the Harmel's house where the glass was broken outward. He passed along the side of the house and checked the parking area in the back. No cars. He began praying that Eldon and Doris were gone and nowhere near whatever was happening. He went around the other side of the house, completely encircling it, then stepped onto the front porch and tried the front door. It was locked. He looked through the front window. The glass was mostly gone and saw total chaos inside. The house had been ransacked. He carefully stepped through the window into the once quaint living room, now a pitiful shamble. The furniture was thrown everywhere. The cushions on the sofa were slashed open. The coffee table had been chopped in several pieces. Some floor lamps had been thrown down and broken. Everything was out of its place and thrown about. Eldon, Marshall called. Doris, anybody home? As if I really expected an answer, he thought. But what was that on the mirror over the fireplace? He went for a closer look. Someone had taken red paint, or was it blood? Marshall checked closely. With great relief, he smelled the unmistakable scent of paint, but someone had scrawled an obscene message of hate on the mirror, a very clear threat. He knew he would have to check every room in the house, and right at this moment, he wondered why he didn't feel the same terror he had fed at Harmel's. Maybe this day was turning him numb. Maybe he just wasn't believing any of it anymore. He checked the whole house, upstairs, downstairs, even the cellar, but there was no terrible discoveries, and he was glad. That didn't make him any less concerned, nervous, or perplexed, however. This was too much of a coincidence, despite its basic differences. As he took a second look around the living room, he tried to think if there could be a connection. Obviously, both Harmel and Strachan had been sources for Marshall's investigation and could have become targets for intimidation. But Harmel, in his terrible fear, could have done the damage around his house by himself, fighting off whatever it was, while this damage to the Strachan's house was clearly the act of vandals, of malicious characters out to scare him. That was one connection, fear. Both Harmel and Strachan were the brunt of fear tactics, whatever form they took. But why would, all right, freeze, police? Marshall stayed still, but he did look out through the broken window. There on the porch was a sheriff's officer aiming a gun at him. Take it easy, Marshall said very gently without moving. Get both hands up in the air in plain sight, the officer commanded. Marshall obeyed. The name's Marshall Hogan, editor of the Ashton Clarion. I'm a friend of the Strachans. Just hold steady. I'll have to see some ID, Mr. Hogan. Marshall explained everything as he did it. I'm going to reach into my back pocket here. See? Here's my wallet. Now I'm going to toss it to you through the window there. By now, the officer's partner had mounted the porch and had also had his gun trained on Marshall. Marshall tossed his wallet and went through the broken window, and the first policeman picked it up. The officer checked Marshall's ID. What are you doing here, Mr. Hogan? Trying to figure out what in blazes happened to Eldon's house. And I'd like to know what happened to Eldon and Doris and his wife. The officer seemed satisfied with Marshall's ID and relaxed just a little bit, but his partner kept a gun trained on Marshall. The officer tried the front door and then asked, how did you get in there? Through that window, Marshall answered. Okay, Mr. Hogan, I'm going to ask you to step very carefully back through the window and do it very slowly. Please keep both hands in plain sight. Marshall obeyed. As soon as he got out on the porch, the officer turned him around, his hands against the wall, and frisked him. Marshall asked, you guys from Windsor? Windsor Precinct, came the short answer. And with that, the officer grabbed Marshall's wrist with one hand at a time and slapped cuffs on him. We're placing you under arrest. You have the right to remain silent Marshall could think of all kinds of questions to ask, and it was all he could do to keep from disassembling these two, but he knew better than to say a word. Whew. All right. We have just concluded our 4 chapters in our 6th reading of This Present Darkness by Frankie Peretti. I'd like to thank you all for joining me. We're going to close out this session again with prayer. Father, we love you and we thank you, God. We thank you for those that gather here on Monday evenings just to hear the reading of this fictional book that's steeped in truth and reality as it relates to battles that go on in the spiritual realm. God, continue to arouse us, waken us up so that we may pray and cover, God, our cities, our states, our countries, and this world, God. Hallelujah. Lord, we know that you're an all-powerful God, and you desire, God, that we pray in accordance with your word. So, God, I do thank you just for being God. We thank you for your grace. We thank you for your mercy. We thank you for salvation and forgiveness. And God, I'm just asking that you continue to bless each and every one as we go in and out of our daily lives, remembering to offer up prayers to you, God, just for strength and so that your will may be done and that you might be glorified. We give your name glory and honor in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. That's it. I know, Mrs. Dolores, these last 2 weeks have been only an hour and 25 minutes, an hour and a half, typically an hour and 45. But let's see, we read all 4 chapters. Yes, we did. And we'll pick up next week with 25, 26, 27, and 28. I think the book has 45 chapters, though, so we got quite a bit. So if we're next week, hour and 25 minutes, when I peak up at 4, I'm going to slip in another chapter. But for today, we're going to call it quits. All right. I love you all. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again next week. God bless.